Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
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 Good morning.
I think with that.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Guess what? I forgot I'm in Canada, so I log on at 9 o'clock. Like,
Oh,
sorry.
we were just talking about time change differences.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We'll give about another minute for folks to get logged in, and then we'll get started. Okay, good morning and welcome. I'm Pam Clark-Reidenbach. I'm the Executive Director of the Northern Illinois Center for Nonprofit Excellence, more commonly known as NICNE. We are so grateful to have you join with us this morning. This is our last training session of a series of 4 that we've held over the last several months. But before we get started, I want to just take a short second to thank and demonstrate our deep appreciation for the partnership with United Way of Northwest Illinois for providing funds through the Healing Illinois Initiative to offer this free diversity, equity, and inclusion training for nonprofit staff, board members, and volunteers. I know Connie's on the call. Thank you so much, Connie Kraft, for your partnership in this project. Recently, we also offered a Courageous Conversations Facilitators training. If you attended that training and would like to join our Courageous Conversations community of practice to share best practices and learn from and with your peers each month, please put your email in the chat and we'll share the Zoom link for the monthly sessions. Also, NICNE is working in partnership with others on building a culture of belonging in Rockford. We're working with Transform Rockford on that project and many other partners. And if you are looking for ways to get involved in that initiative, we'd love to hear from you. We're working on development of a website, so watch for information from us, but call Billy or I if you want to be a part of that work. We'd love to have you involved. So let's get started. Our presenter for today's session is no stranger to us, right? She has been with us over the last 2 months and was our facilitator for the Courageous Conversation sessions. We are honored to have Traci O'Neill Ellis with us again today. She is a Chicago-based attorney, HR executive, and frequent speaker on race, law, politics, equity, and racially inclusive leadership. She is also a fierce advocate for social justice and is inspiring us to also be fierce advocates. Thank you for all you have done with us over the past several months, Traci. But please welcome back Traci O'Neill Ellis.
Good morning, Billy and Pam. Thank you guys so much. And Pam, thank you for that warm welcome. It has been my absolute pleasure to be with you all these couple of months. And I'm really glad to be here this morning with you to talk about anti-racism and creating more just organizations. I have to tell you all something. So I have some eye drops that were prescribed by my eye doctor. And I've been using them for the past week or so. And he told me that one of the side effects might be blurry vision, but I've been using them for the last week with no problem. And then I put them in this morning and guess what? Yikes, I have blurry vision. So I'm like, oh no, this was like the absolute wrong time. So I'm working off of 2 screens because it's a long story, but one is better for the PowerPoint. One is better for me to see some of the talking points that I want to make sure that you all see. So if you see me looking over here, I am just trying to navigate the blurry vision problems I'm having this morning. So I'll ask for you all's grace as I try to figure that out. All right, let me share my screen. Just one second. Sure. Yep. All right, can everybody see that? Yes, all right, great. So we're gonna be talking, like I said, about anti-racism strategies and what we mean when we say that. We're gonna talk about racism and particularly anti-Black racism, because this country has a particular, it's not the first time that I've said this, but this country has a particular distaste for Black people. So I wanna remind us, as I always do, I wanna level set us. There may be some new people who haven't been with us before. I wanna remind you of the agreements that I'm asking you to enter into with me. And that is that you stay engaged, don't check out on each other. These first 4 are from Glenn Singleton. If you've heard about Courageous Conversations About Race, these are from his framework, these first 4. So stay engaged, don't check out on me, don't check out on each other. Speak your truth. Don't just say what you think others want to hear or what you think I want to hear. Say what's on your mind and what's challenging you. Be willing to experience discomfort. These topics, and particularly this one this morning, they're hard topics, all right? And the conversations can be hard. And we have to be willing, myself included. I do this work all the time. And I still find myself sometimes uncomfortable. And I have to be willing to work through that and sometimes sit with that, right? And expect and accept non-closure. I think everybody can agree we're not going to solve racism today. And so we all might leave here with some lingering questions, concerns, not sure all the ways to be anti-racist and what do I do when I go back to work on Monday to help my organization be more anti-racist. And so there's going to be non-closure, and the work is a journey. It's not a destination. We've got to continuously be growing in this. Then we want to balance showing up as experts and as learners, all right? That means that we've all got something to contribute, and sometimes we're teaching, sometimes we're learning, including me, and let's make space for that. We also want to allow for growth and evolution in understanding and respect and honor that we're all in different places on this journey, all right? Safe space versus brave space. You all have heard me say this before. I can't guarantee that you'll feel safe because the bar for safety, personal safety and feeling, emotional safety is different for everyone. What I'm promising you is I want to create a brave space. so that if you're uncomfortable, if you say, hey, that didn't sit well with me, that this is that place that you can be brave and you can say that, and then we can talk about it collectively, because we care and have concern for each other, and we're all trying to do the best that we can. All right. The devil doesn't need any more advocates. So a lot of times when people say, let me play devil's advocate, what they really mean is, I'm about to come for you and dismantle whatever you just said, right? But the devil doesn't need any more advocates. So again, because of the other agreements, we're all here with good intention. We're going to assume positive intention about each other. If someone doesn't say something just right, we're not here to zing people or to embarrass or make anyone feel bad. So I've said before, I'm a lawyer, and verbal agreements, oral agreements, despite what you may think or have heard, there are certain circumstances in which oral agreements are absolutely valid. One of those circumstances is if the contract can be performed in less than 1 year. That's one of them, but we're going to go with that one. And certainly this contract between us can be performed in less than 1 year. It's going to be performed in a couple of hours. So I'm going to assume that you're willing to enter into these agreements with me, and we're going to move forward. Oh boy, we've done some relaxation and some moving of the shoulder, some head rolls and whatnot. This morning, you're free to do that. But what I want to do is just take 2 minutes. And I do mean a full 2 minutes. And I'm going to set the timer so that I know when we are at 2 minutes. And what we're going to do during these 2 minutes is just relax and try to let go of all the things that are crowding our minds, and get in a place, in a space where we can be open and not feeling anxious. And I know talking about racism and whatnot may have caused some anxiety, but we just want to release that. All right. So I'm going to start, and let's take 2 minutes to just free your mind, relax, go. If you want to roll your shoulders or your neck, do that. I want you to release any anxiety that you may have about this topic that may be causing you concern. We're going to learn together from each other. Got 1 minute left. I want to reiterate again, I put it in the chat earlier when we were just getting started. I'm so glad to be here with you all this morning, and I'm glad you're here. 10 seconds. Okay. All righty. Okay, let's get going. So, We're going to do a quick refresher, and I do mean quick, and my apologies to people who may be here for the first time today. I'm not sure, but we've gone through the next 4 or 5 slides previously, and I'm going to just remind us. So it's going to be pretty quick. So remember this busy chart and the root cause of bias. It's the cycle of socialization. If you remember, I told you then that implicit biases, favorable or unfavorable, and we talked about all the different kinds, several of the different kinds, examples of different kinds of biases a couple of months ago, but favorable or unfavorable biases are developed over a lifetime and beginning in our childhood, and when they're examined and unexamined and unaddressed, they lead to disparities in all kinds of ways that we'll be talking about. But remember, from when we're first born with our families of origin, our parents, our relatives, and these are our first socializations, right? And then we get to 3, and maybe we enter preschool, and then we're exposed to more people and more families and more kids and more teachers. And these are the people that we love and trust, and they shape our expectations and our norms, and we're learning from them, right? I've talked about my 8-year-old and my 3-year-old grandsons. They are learning, certainly. My 3-year-old is not in preschool. 3-year-old grandson is not in preschool yet. So he's with a family member on his mom's side that babysits him every day. So he's in this close cocoon, and he's being shaped by all of us. And same with my 8-year-old grandson, except he's in school now, and then he plays on sports teams and whatnot. And so they're shaped. And then we start to move out into the broader world, and we start to be influenced and shaped by institutions, the institutions of faith institutions, places where we worship, perhaps. Again, our schools, the TV, the legal system, the healthcare system, and we're learning, and we're being influenced and shaped, and we're exposed to more cultures. And remember, we went through several cultures either last time or time before, and we hear lyrics from songs and media and all of that, and we continue in that shaping, and it gets reinforced, enforced, and reinforced as we grow and as we move through the world. And this all results in I've been shaped, and we've been shaped and socialized, but we may have been socialized by different and influenced, and different things stuck with us, but we've all been socialized in this system, right? And so these things become normal to us, and they cause problems for us. And we'll talk about that. So again, we're born into this world with mechanics in place. We have no blame, no shame, no guilt, no consciousness, and really no choice about how we're influenced. If you turn on the TV, you can pick your channels, but ultimately even the commercials in between are influencing you, and the news, which news outlets and whatnot. All right, so we started to form stereotypes and prejudices, and we have our own biases and traditions. And again, this is all part of the socialization and how these messages get deep in our psyche, all right? So then we're experiencing all of this, and we get to a point where we start to recognize that, wait a minute, we keep hearing about racism, and it's not new. It's not new. The conversation certainly has amped up in the last several years, but this is not new, all right? We had a whole civil rights movement around racism. It was on the table before then, and it's on the table. It's been on the table since then, and it's amped up a little bit. And this conversation about racism really causes discomfort. I'll say that. Because as soon as you start talking about racism, you've got some people who feel like, it's not really a thing anymore. You've got some people who feel like, yeah, well, it's a thing because you keep talking about it. And if you stop talking about it, then it stopped being a thing. And then there are people who feel like when we go through and start pointing out racism, that I'm not racist. right? And I think that this is a common definition that people think of when they think of being a racist, they think of this definition. These are the people who use racist slurs and dislike people because of their race and think down and think less of them because of their race and believe they're superior to that. We've heard a lot about white supremacy and white supremacist violence in the last few years. The problem, though, is that this, and if any of you all have read Dr. Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility, you know that she talks about this is that good-bad binary, and it sets us up as, you're racist and you're bad, I'm not racist, and that therefore I'm good. And I don't do or think those things, therefore I'm not racist. All right? But we're gonna evolve a little bit past that, a lot past that, hopefully, this morning. So I wanna start to unpack racism. And you can see this definition of racism, and this is from Dr. DiAngelo. It basically says that it's prejudice plus power. If you all read my bio somewhere, you may know that I wrote a book, and I say in that book that for example, I hold firm to the belief that Black people cannot be racist. We can definitely be prejudiced, which is wrong, right? But we all got socialized in this system together. So we can be prejudiced, but racism requires the power coupled with prejudice. All right. And we don't have, Black folks and other marginalized people, people of color do not have the power, the systemic power to control and oppress. All right. So if someone, let me step back for a minute. I have to say this. I should have said it at the beginning. I'm going to say some words that may be triggering to some people, and I want to warn you up front, particularly around what is politely said in society as the N-word. I don't really use the N-word because when people who use the N-word use it, and it has been used against me, they don't say, hey, you N-word. No, they say, trigger warning, they say nigger, hard R. And I say that because it needs that flinch that you do. We need to never lose that. We need to never lose that flinch. And if we soften it in polite company by saying N-word, kind of softens it, kind of makes it less harsh than it really is. All right. So it is beyond just the person, the white guy, the white woman who called me a nigger, right? Yeah, it stings, but that person doesn't have the ability to oppress me. But these systems that I have to operate in do, and that's why I like this definition of racism. But there are other definitions that are equally as valid. And this one talks about the ideology, that it's an ideology and it's an institution that reflects these racial worldviews. And we divvy people up into categories and to racial groups, and we've all heard that race is a construct, and that is very true. It's a construct. It's not even a real thing. The problem is that in this system, our systems operate as though it is, and we've constructed systems that are hierarchical and value some over others. So while race is really a social construct, we've actually embedded it into our systems to favor some and oppress others. All right. There are other definitions that, when we talk about oppression, I want to make sure that we are on the same page about that. It is the system that maintains advantages and disadvantages based on your social group memberships, based on your racial group memberships, right? Another definition of racism, again, that includes the prejudice plus power. You hear a lot about institutional and systemic, all right? So I wanted to give us kind of a common definition of institutional racism, all right? This occurs at the institutional level, all right? That's when the policies and practices and systems within institutions create these racialized outcomes and perpetuate these racialized outcomes. And generally in this country, we're talking about racism that results in inequitable outcomes that generally favor white people over historically marginalized people, tend to be people of color when we're talking about race, particularly Black people. We've also seen a real uptick. I just saw a statistic this week saying that anti-Asian violence has increased 104, incidents of violence have increased 164% over the last 2 years. I think I don't have the stat in front of me anymore, but that's race-based violence, okay? And then we've got Black folks with a 400-year history of racialized violence, okay? And then systemic racism, again, referring to white people's historical and systematic oppression of people of color that creates these structures and racist operations in this country. And again, it ends up creating racialized inequities in wealth, income, employment, housing. We're going to look at these systems, right? So I want to give you an analogy about, while we're unpacking racism, I want to give you this analogy. And this is from Dr. D'Angelo's book, but she uses the women's suffrage movement as an analogy to explain institutional or systemic racism. And this struggle of the women's suffrage movement can show us and is instructive in how institutional power can transform prejudice and discrimination into systemic oppression. Everybody has biases, right? We learned that a couple of months ago. We all have biases. Therefore, any of us, I just said a moment ago, Black folks can be prejudiced. Any of us can be prejudiced, all right? We all hold those biases. But systems of oppression operate independent of individuals. So when I say the system of policing in this country is racist, that doesn't mean that I am saying every police officer in this country is racist. To be sure, some police officers in this country are racist, but I'm not saying every person is racist. And that's why I don't, the good apples versus bad apples, that takes it down to the individual level. I'm talking about a system that is racist, all right? And it's not about good apples and bad apples. The whole tree is rotten, root to branch. And good apples perhaps grow, sure, on bad trees. Bad apples grow on bad trees, but we need to look at the tree, not the apple, apples that fall from them. So in the system with women's suffrage movement, it is true, even in today's society now, current times, that women can be prejudiced and women can have biases against men. Women can discriminate against men. Let's just be honest here, right? And in our individual actions, we can discriminate against men. But even back and especially during the suffrage movement, while women then could discriminate against men, as a group, they did not have the power to deny men their civil rights. Okay? But men as a group could and did deny women their civil rights and deny them their right to vote, all right? And they could do that because they controlled all the institutions. They had systemic power, all right? And these institutions then churned, independent of whether there were any men in there who actually supported women's civil rights It didn't matter if there were individual men who supported that women had the right to vote. Women should have full rights in societies. The systems were built and shut women out of workplaces, of rights to vote, all of that, okay? So, the only way that women then could gain suffrage, could gain the right to vote, was for men to give it to them. For men to give it to them. Women could not grant themselves the right to vote. So institutional racism works the same way. So while white men did eventually grant full voting access to white women in 1920, women of color, Black women, Indigenous women, were denied full access until the Voting Rights Act of 1964. And then in recent years, you've been seeing these attempts. There are like 254 bills pending right now across the country in different states, and to different bills that are designed to roll back voting rights, particularly for Black folks in this country, okay? So I hope that analogy helps in understanding institutional racism. So we wanna keep unpacking this ideology, and the cycle of socialization taught us that, again, we're bombarded with these messages, and then through the media and advertising in our families and our schools and our places of worship, and just walking around all the systems, even our, you go to the bank, we've learned how banking works in this country. And all of these systems reinforce racial hierarchies and are the outcome of natural order. We don't even think about this stuff a lot of times. We don't think about some of the things that we're going to talk about here this morning. And these ideologies and biases then obscure racism as systems of inequities. All right, so we were talking about systems again, right? So we're going to stay at the systems level because we're not overly concerned this morning about individual racists, right? We're talking about systemic racism. So I just said that all of our systems are built in ways that create racial hierarchies and racist outcomes, and they're reinforced, right? And so the housing system, well, let's start with education down here on the bottom left. The education system. Black preschoolers are 3.6 times more likely to be suspended than white preschoolers. Black students are half as likely to be assigned to gifted programs, even when they have comparably high test scores as white children. Black kids are seen as less than, not capable. They're over-disciplined. I sat on the school board of a large school system in the state of Illinois for 2 terms, and the data showed that although Black students were only 7 to 8% of the student population in that district, they made up well over 30%, 40% of expulsions. They're only 7% of the population, but 40% of the expulsions were Black kids. White students, on the other hand, made up, we were 7, 30, they made up about 40% of the district. I could be off a few percentage points. They made up about 40% of the district and were only 13% of expulsions. Right? Now, just by the law of averages, you'd have to believe that a group of people, group of students that make up 40, 45% of the district would have more than a 13% incident rate of expulsions. Unless you believe that white students are just inherently better behaved. And if you do, and that Black students are inherently have behavior problems, if you do, I'm going to challenge you to think about, how did you come to that conclusion? Think about the cycle of socialization, right? So let's look at the criminal justice system over here in the top right. Black men are 6 times more likely to be incarcerated than white men. 46% are incarcerated for drug offenses, even though Black and white Americans use drugs at the same rate. Research shows us that Black people, particularly Black men, but Black people as a whole, are pulled over more often by the police. When they are pulled over, they are charged more frequently than white people with crimes. They are charged with more crimes in one incident than white people are. They're charged, and then they go through the court system and they are convicted more often for the same crimes than white people. And when they're convicted, they are sentenced more harshly than white people for the same crimes, all right? Now, that does not mean that, again, that every police officer, every judge are all racist in our traditional definition of racism. That doesn't mean they're looking at a Black man saying, I hate these Black men. I'm gonna ruin his day today. To be sure, there are some, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a system that's made up of people who've been socialized a certain way, all right? Let's think about the wealth system, banking, and which really should represent wealth, all right? A typical white family has 16 times the wealth of a Black family. It will take, if white people stopped gaining wealth right now, just stopped, white people stayed exactly where they are collectively in terms of wealth accumulation. And Black people continue to accumulate wealth at the same rate that we're accumulating, and white people stopped. So you all aren't gaining on us. We're trying to catch up. It would take 228 years, research shows, for Black families to accumulate collectively the same amount of wealth. The employment system, Black applicants without criminal records fared as well getting hired as white applicants with criminal records, right? Black folks are twice as likely to be unemployed as white people. In the housing sector, the rate of home ownership for white Americans is 73%. For Black folks, it's 45%. Black people tend to receive higher interest rates when applying for conventional mortgages. 1 in 4 Black people are denied compared to 1 in 10 in white America. Media representation of the top grossing films in 2015, 73% of speaking roles went to white Americans and just 12% went to Black Americans and 5% to Latinos. I've tried to find more recent stats on that and could not. Black folks report experiencing discrimination at significantly higher rates than other racial groups, leading to PTSD-like symptoms, not from war, but from living in America. And research shows that racism creates PTSD-like trauma in Black people. The healthcare system, and we're going to look at that a little bit later too in more depth, but the Washington Post found that white people are more likely to be prescribed strong medications for the stronger medications for equivalent illnesses and pains due to unconscious bias. There's research found that there's medical bias, that subconsciously, unconsciously, the medical system, our healthcare system, thinks that Black people have higher pain thresholds. So therefore we get lower dosages, strengths of medication than do white people for their ailments, for their pain, all right? Let's watch a video, hopefully. I think I queued this up right.
Dig deep into America's $17 trillion economy, and you'll find fractures beneath the surface. The spoils are split unevenly between men and women, old and young, high school dropouts, and MBAs. But one of the most divisive disparities is only skin deep. This is the economy in black and white. Everything you own, houses, stocks, cars, that's your wealth. In 2011, the wealth of the median white household was over $110,000. African Americans on average, 17 times less. just over 6,000. And housing has a lot to do with it. For the average American, their home is the most valuable part of their portfolio. It's an investment that can appreciate with time, and it can be passed from one generation to the next. But the rate of homeownership among whites is 28% higher than that of blacks, and the lingering effects of segregation could be to blame. Discriminatory practices by the Federal Housing Authority prevented African Americans from buying houses in many suburban neighborhoods. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 sought to level the playing field. But by then, African Americans were entering a housing market that had already seen massive appreciation. Meanwhile, white families had seen their housing investment soar in value during their head start. Fast forward to the 21st century, minority groups were again victims of housing exploitation, this time by big banks. Bank of America and Wells Fargo, among others, were compelled to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and restitution for pushing minorities into exploitative subprime mortgages and charging them higher rates and fees. This contributed to the fact that Blacks and Hispanics lost nearly a quarter of their wealth between 2004 and 2010. Whites lost just 1% during that same period. So the American economy houses two realities, one Black, one white. The divide between them, a measure of inequality.
Okay, so, oops. Stop that. So that video referred to 2011. I encourage you, if you're concerned, because some people, I've gotten comments when I've shown this film in other in other workshops, to say, well, that's old data. Where's the recent data? Go to YouTube and put wealth, racial wealth disparity or something like that. There are tons of videos with more recent data, and it is just as grim. The situation has not gotten better. I didn't bring those videos in because they're much longer. Like the shortest one I could find was almost 7 minutes. So, but I encourage you, if you're interested in finding more recent numbers, to look for yourself. All right, so let's do.
Dig deep into America's.
Sorry. Sorry about that. Let's look at in the healthcare industry. So we know, you've probably all heard with COVID-19, which by the way, I've changed to COVID-30 because that's how many pounds I've gained during COVID. So I now call it COVID-30. But why are Black people dying at higher rates from COVID-19? Because that is a fact, that Black people are dying at higher rates from COVID-19. So are Latinos, but Black people, we're at the top. We're winning, if that's, the highest numbers win. We're losing actually with COVID-19, all right? So we know that Black people, because a lot of people have said, well, Black people are dying more because they're not healthy. Black people we don't take care of ourselves. So that we do have higher incidences of underlying health issues such as hypertension and diabetes. And for example, high blood pressure, diabetes affect over 40% of Black men and women. And this develops earlier in our lives than white people, usually with more severe effects. Coronary heart disease is a major killer across all racial groups, but a large body of literature suggests that because there's a higher incidence rate in the Black community, and the research suggests that racism in all of its varied forms, interpersonal, institutional, and structural, disproportionately undermines the health of Black people in the United States. Multiple scholars argue that racism becomes embodied over the course of our lives, negatively impacting or negatively affecting Black people through multiple pathways, like disproportionate exposures to environmental toxins, as well as economic and social deprivation. Research also shows that Black people are disproportionately poor. And therefore, this disproportionate level of poverty creates a lack of access to quality health care. and therefore disproportionately puts us at risk for untreated or undertreated chronic illnesses, making us at a higher risk for COVID-19 and the more severe forms of the virus due to these preconditions. Again, according to some very solid research, historically, Black women are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of race-related stress, given our, since I'm a Black woman, given our socially constructed identities as the intersection of Black and as women. These findings are, these research findings then are consistent with the hypothesis that racial discrimination is a chronic stressor that can negatively impact the cardiovascular health of Black people through pathogenic processes, okay? That's what the research means by saying that it really literally embodies, right, us. Okay, so we've got these underlying conditions. Racism is a reason in part for these conditions. We have a history of racial medical practices in this country, right? Henrietta Lacks, you've seen the movie or read the book about how she was unwittingly used. Her cells were without her permission. Black women have been sterilized, indigenous women sterilized against our will in the name of research and in the name of not preventing, or in the name of preventing procreation. We have the Tuskegee experiments where Black men were injected intentionally with syphilis so that researchers could study the impact. That happened for 40 years. And more recently, French scientists recommended testing on Black people for a COVID cure. Head of intensive care at a hospital in Paris said, if I can be provocative, shouldn't we be doing this study in Africa where there are no masks, no treatments, and no resuscitation? What does that mean? Now we know what it means, that you would think that in Africa, Black people don't have, Black Africans are not wearing masks and there's no treatment, no resuscitation, there are no doctors, there are no hospitals. It's that perpetuation, if we really examine, it's that perpetuation of the belief that they're all running around in the jungle, right? I mean, that is a very racist sentiment there. Another comment. A bit like it is done elsewhere for some studies on AIDS. In prostitutes, we try things because we know they're highly exposed and they don't protect themselves. So you see this intersection, that's against women, right? Of how the medical system, if that is happening, he's saying we try things on them. Prostitutes are used for experiments because in this system, not everybody's life matters the same. So can you imagine the intersection of being Black and a woman? And that's why Black women have higher incidences, not higher incidences, but more severe forms of PTSD-like symptoms. So let's continue to unpack systemic oppression. These are some statistics from Dr. D'Angelo's book. I changed one of them. Here, the president and vice president, 100% white in the history of America. It did say with one exception. Now we have a Black and Southeast Asian vice president, so I changed it to 2 exceptions in the history of this country, all right? If you look, the 10 richest Americans, 100% white, 7 of whom were the richest in the world. Now these stats are from 2018, I believe, so, you know, the numbers could have shifted some, but let's be honest, not much. US Congress is 90% white. US governors are 96% white. Top military advisors, 100% white. We talked about the president and vice president. The US House Freedom Caucus, 99% white. People who decide which television shows we watch, 93% white. People who decide which news is covered, 85% white. People who decide which music is produced, 95% white. But wait, there's more. Teachers, 82% white. Full-time college professors, 84% white. Owners of men's professional football teams, 84% white. So as Dr. D'Angelo pointed out, these are not minor organizations. This is not your mom and pop grocery store type organizations. These systems right here are some of the most powerful in the country. These numbers are not a matter of good people versus bad people. They represent power and control by a racial group that is in position to disseminate and protect its own self-interest, worldview, and images across an entire society. So this powerful group sets the standard for what's normal, and everything else falls outside of what is normal in this country. So I want to stop and ask, and I can't see the chat at all, so I'll ask Billy or Pam to tell me what you're seeing. I want to ask, how many times we've thought about the president having a black vice president, having a black president, because that's been in our psyche in recent years. But outside of those, how many times have you all thought about the rest of these? Just put a number from 0 up to, let's say 10 is you're well aware of this, you think about it and ponder it all the time. 0 is I never thought about that before. So just throw a number in the chat.
Zero, sixes, a lot of 5s and 6s. 3, 7, 4, 10. A 2.
Okay. Thank you.
A 10.
How do these stats then, how does this impact us? %90 of Congress is white, so what? 10 richest Americans, white, so what? Top military advisors, white, so what? What does it mean? Why am I even showing these stats? People who decide what TV shows we watch, 93% white. What difference does it make? What do populate the chat, please? Just a couple of words, a sentence or two.
Matthew shared it's demotivating. Andrea shared that she's thought about it much more in the past 2 years.
Because the conversation's been elevated, yeah.
There's an impact on what information shared, creates bias and oppression. Exhausting, hopeless, lack of balance, not enough representation.
And what does not enough representation do to us? Thank you for sharing that in the chat. So when we look at some of the most powerful systems in our country, that means that the way that our views are shaped, the way systems operate, the way they're constructed, all are coming through this Eurocentric view, primarily. The most powerful systems in our country have one viewpoint. One viewpoint. I believe I meant to double check this. I believe that in corporate America, there's only one Black female CEO. In all of corporate America, top, I should say, Fortune 500. Corporate America could be, much, much smaller companies that are off the radar. I'm talking about Fortune 500, the big ones. I think there's one Black woman. So there are few Black men. Overwhelmingly, corporate America is run predominantly by white men, and then to a lesser degree, white women. And then there's a smattering of Black men. And then you've got that one Black woman out there. So even how our corporate systems work are all through one lens, okay? All right, let's keep going. All right, I hear you. You're saying, you're thinking, okay, that's great, Traci, but I'm not racist. I'm not racist. And my question to you is, how do you know? How do you know that you're not racist? What are some of the things that people say to demonstrate that they're not racist? Any others you can think of? What have you said to demonstrate that you're not racist? What have you heard other people say? You can throw that in the chat. But I don't see color. Some of you saw my TEDx talk video.
I have Black friends. They talk about how they grew up poor as well, similar experiences.
Or for me, when I'm in Canada, and when I tell them they were marginalizing and oppressed me, the CEO said to me, well, my parents were Jewish and I would never do that because I knew what that meant from their stories. Mm. And in the very moment she was saying that, she planned a meeting with all the managers. I was the only Black manager that was excluded to help shape the teamwork of the organization. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great example. Great example. Yep. Great example. Okay, so the I'm not racist traditionally means that I don't engage, again, we talked about that good, bad binary. I don't engage in racist slurs, racist jokes, intentional discrimination, and avoiding people. So that CEO that you were talking about, Ms. Phillips, probably in her, I think I heard you refer to her as a woman, in her mind, it's like, I'm not oppressing or marginal. I would never do that. I don't do those things. I don't see color, right? People profess to be colorblind, but that's not true. It's not true because white people only say that to people of color, particularly Black people. White people only say that to Black people, which means in fact, you do see my color. I told you about my unscientific experiment with my one white sister-in-law, where I was like, hey, do you guys tell white people you don't see color? She's like, no, of course not. So, but when I talk to white people about this, they agree. They don't say I don't see color to other white people. So in fact, you do see color, right? All right. I'm not racist, but we've just spent some time going through all of these major institutions. And we did a little bit of a deep dive. We're going to go deeper in healthcare. I just picked a sector in the healthcare system to show some racialized outcomes. In a racist society, it's not good enough to be not racist. I'm not racist. If we want to do this work, and you all voluntarily you're on here this morning with me, we're all here together, there's some interest then in trying to understand what it means to be anti-racist. All right. How do you become anti-racist? Because you individually, I believe you, if you say you're not racist in the traditional definition, you wouldn't call me a nigger. If you were a police officer, you don't think that you would disproportionately pull over my 2 Black sons. But being not racist might be good for you individually, and it certainly is good, is good for you individually, but you being not racist does nothing to disrupt racism, racist outcomes on an individual or a systemic level. It does nothing. So we've got Dr. Eduardo Silva Bonilla wrote a book. The title might be, but certainly the book is about, we got all this racism and no racist. We got all this racism running around this country, but no racist. All right. So you individually, you're not racist. I take you at your word under the good, bad binary. But what does that do to dismantle racism? Systemic racism. How then do you become anti-racist? Can somebody, just because this quote is so powerful for me and I want to stop talking and the screen is blurry to me, can someone read that quote out loud? Anybody?
Step number 1 is to admit and confess one's own racist ideas or even the policies that one has supported that create racial inequity, now in red. It's very difficult to grow up in a country or even a world that's constantly raining racist ideas on your head and to never get wet. That's how hard it is, essentially, to never consume any racist ideas. And so the first step is admitting that. Dr. Ibram X. Kendi.
Yeah, just sit with that for a second. Just want to reflect on that for a moment. It's very difficult to grow up in a country or even a world that's constantly raining racist ideas on your head and to never get wet. So step 1 in becoming an anti-racist is admit it and confess it, that you've had some racist ideas, that you've supported some racist policies that have created racialized inequities. So I want to simplify the definition of racism. We've talked about several different definitions, and I want to give you a simpler definition of a simpler way to think about racism that really gets to the heart of how we might contribute to this problem of racism. A racist then is one who supports a racist policy through their actions or inactions, or expressing a racist idea, or expresses a racist idea. An anti-racist is one who is supporting anti-racist policies through their actions or expressing anti-racist ideas. Now, under this definition of racism, are you a racist? You don't have to populate the chat, just asking you to reflect on that. Are you a racist under this definition? Have you ever been a racist under this definition? Does this definition show how any of us might be acting in a racist way at any given moment? Does this definition require then that you are always, at all times, forever, a racist? So a little bit ago, I said that I wrote in my book and I hold firm that Black people cannot be racist because racism requires power plus prejudice. I mean, prejudice plus the power to oppress. But there is a thing, and I have always held fast to also, I have at one time had what I called internalized racism. Not at one time, I still have internalized racism against Black people. That's the difference, is that the racist ideas that I have held and I'm still unpacking, and most Black folks, if they're honest or have examined this and done the work themselves, could acknowledge that we hold racist ideas against each other as well. All right, that are internalized racism. So I was socialized, right, in the same ways that white people are socialized in this country. I heard and saw and internalized the same messages, same negative messages and stereotypes and tropes about Black people from the time that I was born. I saw the same media images from the time that I was born about Black people that white people did. So if I was rained down with all of these racist messages and outcomes, how could I not get wet, right? So at one time, I had thoughts like, well, if only these young Black men would pull their pants up, then they would be treated better. But you know what? Dr. King was in a suit and tie when he was assassinated. If only Black people would get more education, pay more attention in school, get more education. But I was a licensed attorney. I am a licensed attorney and was so at the time that I was sent by a clerk, ordered by a clerk in the courtroom to go sit in the defendants and move out of the area where attorneys congregate. I was an attorney when opposing counsel called me a nigger right outside a courtroom.
Traci, I have another example for you right now that this morning I had to unpack it in front of my team. I work in a long-term care home and we have been shut down through COVID and we just start admission. So we are on our third admission and 2 other residents was admitted and 1 Black gentleman admitted. And I only knew from the email. And it was funny that they put in it that as I was reading it, a well-mannered 78-year-old Black male speaks English well. There was nothing about the other resident more than about their behavior to say what color. How daring that you could choose the ethnicity and the words you use speak English well, well-mannered.
Yeah.
Black male.
There's a lot of unconscious bias underneath that comment, right? A lot of, so when people say to me, Traci, you're so articulate. Why would you say that? I speak like you speak. Why does it make me articulate? There's a lot, and you could say, someone could say, well, stop being so sensitive. But you can't be in this system and understand how racism works and the biases that people have about Black people and then not take that comment a certain way. We have a preference in this country for, speaking the King's English, if you will. So then everybody who does not speak the King's English is otherized, is marginalized, is seen as less than. So then when Black people speak a different dialect, we're seen as less intelligent. And I think I said to this group, I know I've said to a recent group that I've done workshops with, if you all were to be a fly on the wall or hear me when I'm with my Black friends and my Black family, I don't always speak this way. I am fluent in Ebonics. I'm fluent in the, what some scholars call AAVE, AAVE, African American Vernacular English. When I come into, doesn't mean that I never speak proper English with my family or whatever. I'm just saying that when I'm more relaxed and around in a safe space, that I can exhale and speak culturally. And so, but when I'm in professional situations, I understand the dynamics of this country, that it is okay if you are not from this country and foreign born, if you don't speak perfect English. But if you looked at me and heard me not speaking perfect English, I would be thought less of. I would be deemed to be less intelligent. So imagine kids in school, Black kids in school, who come in, who speak culturally for them. They are deemed less intelligent. So then start thinking through how that impacts. They're seen as less intelligent. So then what are the standards and expectations for them? And a lot of these kids, especially K through 12, have not learned the golden skill of code switching, which allows me to be fluent and to move in and out. It's just like anyone who speaks a foreign language. When you're with your family and friends who speak that language, you might speak that language. When you come into, if you're bilingual or trilingual, if you come into this environment here, you speak English because that's what everybody else is speaking. That's a form of code switching, and Black people do it frequently. Okay. So I want to get back to this idea of you know, if you're supporting a racist policy or racist actions or inactions or expressing racist ideas, you can be racist. So a lot of times when I'm speaking, people have said, well, Candace Owens said, and I don't know if you all know Candace Owens, but she's a Black woman who has somewhat of a platform, media platform, who basically, you know, is one of these that racism doesn't really exist and Black people need to just do better, et cetera, et cetera. So when people say to me, yeah, but what about Candace Owens? I don't know. I'm not an apologist for Candace Owens. What I will tell you is that Candace Owens was socialized in the same ways that white people were socialized in this country. And I suspect that Candace Owens is embodying internalized racism. She is supporting racist policies and racist ideas, and she hasn't realized it yet. She hasn't done the work. And when I say that I still have internalized racism, it is a lifelong journey to dry myself off from all the lifetime of racist ideas that have been rained down on me. So I'm constantly, it is a constant work to unpack, to rid myself of this internalized racism against Black people. Now I've been on this journey a long time now. So I'm kind of far down the road, but not always. And sometimes my two sons, I'll say something, and my two sons, one who will be 31 next month and the other one is 27, will remind me or point out like, Ma, that was racist. And I'll get ready to object, but I'm learning to stop and challenge myself and think about that. Where did I get that idea from? That whatever it was I just said. Okay. All right. Let's see here. So this is I said I want to simplify, I want to boil being racist down. I don't mean to reject the other definitions that we looked at a little while ago. These multiple definitions of racism are not contradictory or inconsistent. Racism is complex. It's got layers to it, and it manifests in different ways at different times in different situations, different systems. And it has this long and sordid history in this country. And therefore, there are a lot of definitions, many definitions that get at different ways for us to look at racism and turn it over and see all of its sides and really get to understand it. So all these definitions that I've shown you this morning are not in conflict with each other. This simplified definition here is not meant to override the more complex definitions that we considered earlier. It is a way, though, to boil it down to its simplest terms, to get you to consider how you may be acting in racist ways, with or without intention. All right. So all of these institutions, many of them, all right, these systems and industries we've been talking about, and even some of our organizations, ouch, were established on racist principles, including eugenics. Now, eugenics is a set of beliefs and practices that aim, and it dates back to the 1800s, that aims to scientifically define the biological improvement of genes and therefore society, all right, by the elimination of certain groups of people, such as those with cognitive disabilities, those with criminal behavior. Black people were included in eugenics work. And the thought was that if you could carefully control marriages, so with respect to because we're here to talk about racism this morning, if you could carefully control marriages and eliminate intermarrying, right, which was illegal at one time for Black and white people to marry, if you control that, carefully construct what marriage is, then society could wipe out these undesirables in 3 generations. I said 3 and put up 2 fingers. 3 generations. These beliefs, similar, again, part of the way that we were socialized, these beliefs similarly drive policies around housing, economics, education, immigration, okay? Therefore, employees, including leaders in our organizations, are often unwittingly upholding racist policies, practices and procedures and ways of being that are grounded in these old eugenics concepts that we've internalized about ourselves and others. Remember the cycle of socialization, about this hierarchy of who really, I mean, they're all, white people are in power, white people control all the systems, they must be the smartest and the best. It's the natural order of things. As this sign says, some people are born to be a burden on the rest. All right. I don't know if you can read these lower signs, but it says this light flashes every 48 seconds. Every 18 seconds, a person is born in the United States who will never grow up mentally beyond the state of a normal 8-year-old boy or girl. We should rid the system, society of them. This light flashes every 50 seconds. Every 50 seconds, a person is committed to jail in the United States. Very few normal, that normal's underlined, very few normal persons ever go to jail. So if from the 1800s, we thought that people who go to jail are not normal, and because of racism in the system, Black men are over incarcerated, then they must not be normal. Okay. So you cannot, a lot of our organizations were all on this D&I journey, right? You can never diversify your way out of systems built on racist, white supremacy or racist ideologies. I've said it before, you cannot build inclusive organizations on top of inequitable or racist systems. I have a quote here from, it's a little bit out of context, but I didn't want to get too far off the topic, but Wezia Yadamwin and Michael Yellowbird are indigenous Native American scholars. And they talk about the way forward is decolonization. So then you have to stop and ask a moment, what do they mean? What is this reference to decolonizing? So then what is colonizing? We start back, take a step back. So this country has a long and sordid history of colonizing people and lands. So the indigenous people were displaced and continue to be displaced. They were the first here before all of us. First group here last group to get citizenship legally. Did you know that Native Americans did not gain citizenship until the Indian Citizenship Act passed on June 2nd, 1924? When did Columbus sail the ocean blue and discover America? Was that poem that, we were taught? Columbus sailed the ocean blue. I don't even remember it. I'm glad I've forgotten it. Something about 1492. And discovered America. And then we, hopefully all know what happened, what really happened that causes us to celebrate Thanksgiving. So we celebrate Thanksgiving. I shudder to think at all the years that I celebrated Thanksgiving, thinking this is awesome, without understanding the racist and violent origins. And that does not mean that I still don't, get together with family and whatnot, but I'm always, pointing out to my family, hey, we're gathered here, standing on land that doesn't belong to us because the first people were colonized. All right. So we want to be anti-racist, and we got to start being conscious of anti-racist practices, because anti-racism is a verb. It means that you don't support or tolerate racist language, systems, policies, practices, behaviors, or ideologies. You are actively engaged in dismantling racist systems. You are an ally to people of color, particularly Black people. You are an ally for Asian people and against the violence that is happening. And listen, I've had Black people challenge me on this because I have posted frequently about the violence that Asians are experiencing now. And I've had Black people come for me, and say, these are people that are in my circle. So when I say come for me, I mean, they're like, Tracy, why are you out here caping, trying to be superhero for Asians? They never stand up for Black people. So now in recent years, they're experiencing some things, but we've been experiencing it for 400 years. That is a racist ideology. That's internalized racism. That's doing that hierarchical ordering of whose lives matter the most. It is playing oppression Olympics. Okay. And so when I'm trying to practice a liberation theology, we've all got to get free, or none of us really can be free. All right. So being not racist, again, does nothing to prevent Botham Jean or Ahmaud Arbery or Breonna Taylor or George Floyd, or a cousin of mine who was shot and killed running away in the back by a Chicago police officer a few years back. Prevents none of that brutality and death. It prevents none of the racialized outcomes in our organization. Being anti-racist is that fight against those systems that repeatedly produce these results. With sustained efforts, we can begin to dismantleize, decolonize our systems of oppression. You can tell I kind of have a crush on Ibram Kendi, huh? Can somebody read this, please?
The heartbeat of anti-racism is self-reflection, recognition, admission, and fundamental self-critique. A racist, when charged with racism, will say, I'm not a racist, no matter what they said or did. An anti-racist would be willing to confess and recognize what they just said or did was, in fact, racist.
So if I can only see 6 people on the screen, so I'm just going to pick on someone, forgive me, but if Lisa I see Lisa Kelly on here. If she and I were engaged in conversation and she said, but Traci, when I look at you, I don't see color. And if I say to Lisa, Lisa, that comment is offensive and has racist underpinnings. You're trying to whitewash me. Now, Lisa has two choices right there. She can be offended, bring up tears, white fragility, get indignant, angry, walk away, storm off, never talk to me again, delete me as a Facebook friend, say I'm not racist, you're racist, how dare you? Did you know my kids I had Black kids over at my house last week. Did you know my sister's married to a Black man? I have Black nieces and nephews. How dare you call me racist? Or Lisa can take a deep breath and say, oh, I'm sorry, that was not my intent. And maybe it was not. But I just had to apologize to a colleague on Monday about something unrelated to anything on this topic. I did something. She was very upset by what I did. My intent was completely pure, but the impact of what I did not land well with her. Now, it didn't matter what my intent was. My intent was pure. I didn't mean to harm her or make her feel a certain way. And so I apologized genuinely and sincerely, even knowing that my intent was pure, because the impact of it did not land well. Your intent is not what's most important. It is the impact of it. All right. So Lisa can get offended, or she can stop and think about it and be willing, even if she has to come back, to confess and recognize that what she did or said was in fact racist, even if that wasn't her intent, even if that wasn't her thought. But because she understands the history of racism, and because she understands how we're socialized, and because she understands that some things are triggering to Black people, she can understand why that might be triggering to me. Okay. All right. Whoops. I need to go backwards. So when we look in our organizations, right? So we want to kind of start to move from just in our personal lives, but this works personally, but also professionally. I want to bring it to our organizations. I want you to look at this list of reflections, self-reflections, the questions that you can ask yourself to begin this journey of anti-racism leadership personally and professionally. And when I use the term leadership, I don't mean that you actually have to be positionally by title in leadership. I'm talking about being an anti-racist leader, wherever you are, whatever your title, personally and professionally. So take just a few seconds and read this list. And I want you to pick one or two of these and not just read them, but start to answer them for yourself. Who is my leadership serving and how? Now, I'm the chief equity officer, chief legal officer, chief HR officer in my regular day job. So as chief equity officer, I'm immersed in this work, right? I've been with you all a couple of months. I do this work all the time outside of my day job. Fortunately, I have the flexibility and ability to do that. And so this is my ministry, if you will. I'm immersed in this. And yet I had a realization about 3 or 4 weeks ago in a couple of ways that I'm upholding some policies and practices in my regular job that are having racialized outcomes. Therefore, I am acting in a racist way. And I have positional power and leaders and title and all of that. And there are some practices. Now there's some practices and ways of being that I'm trying to dismantle. I'm very actively working on being anti-racist in those things, but I had a realization, a light bulb moment that, oh my gosh, I've got to deconstruct a very white supremacist approach to my leadership, and starting to think about now, how do I need to lead differently? Who am I serving? And how am I serving? Who are the services of my organization, your organizations? Who are they accessible to and not accessible to? Whose voices do you center even in your personal life? Have you read any books by Black authors lately? So that you start to, Black authors about Black experiences and Black life, so that you start to get a different perspective? How are you disrupting assimilationist frameworks? We'll talk about that assimilation in a minute. Is your leadership, is your life, personally, professionally, are you providing healing, empowerment, support, and love to others? Are you standing in the way of some people? Again, not in your intention, I'm talking about impact. Who's holding you accountable? And how are they holding you accountable? How are you supporting your own self-care and healing so that you don't perpetuate cycles of trauma? How are you taking care of yourself so that you can put your armor on and dive deep into these topics and heal from your own anti-racist behaviors, beliefs, so that you don't continue to perpetuate cycles of trauma for Black people? How are you ensuring your own learning and growth? These questions have been modified just slightly, a couple of them from the liberation theory body of work by Dr. Laura Monero, but it's really the liberation theory is about getting free, right? Us all getting free. And I talk a lot when I'm talking to Black people about Black liberation, right? Okay, but liberation is really like we've all got to get free from these racist constructs and confines that we have. Can somebody read that quote? Notice I'm asking others to read it because it's blurry to me, but can someone read that quote?
If you want to feel secure, do what you already know how to do. But if you want to grow, go to the cutting edge of your competence, which means a temporary loss of security. So whenever you don't quite know what you are doing, know that you are growing.
Thank you. Whoever did that, thank you. So this model here is called the learning zone. And it is used for many different examples in many different constructs of moving from fear, from your fears to your growth. This has been adapted for anti-racism. I didn't do it, so I can't take credit for it. I don't know who did this. Otherwise, I would give them credit. But if you look at this, take a few minutes, take a minute, and think about which zone you're in. So being anti-racist, and if I look, I can see it better on this screen. Becoming anti-racist, if you're in the fear zone, you're denying that racism is a problem. You're avoiding hard questions. You're striving to be comfortable and stay comfortable. And you are really only talking to people who look and think like you, because you need to be comfortable. you can move to the learning zone, you now are starting to recognize racism is a present and current problem. You seek out questions that make you uncomfortable. You understand your own privilege in ignoring racism. Because you can, if you're white, you can decide like, listen, I can't deal with this today, or this week or this month. I'm on racism overload. I just got to go back to my regular life. But for Black people and other oppressed people, we can never walk away from it. You educate yourself about race and structural racism. You're vulnerable about your own biases and knowledge gaps. You listen to others who think and look differently than you. It's getting sketchy for me to be able to read that outer circle. You identify how you may unknowingly benefit from racism. You promote and advocate for policies and leaders that are anti-racist. You're willing to be uncomfortable. Matter of fact, you'll embrace that discomfort and you'll sit with it and reflect on it and use it to grow. You speak out when you see it in action. That doesn't mean you're running around going, you're a racist and you're a racist, but there are ways to speak out about this. You're educating your peers and those in your circle about how racism harms us professionally. Personally, but professionally. I'm right now talking about so we're talking about creating just organizations. You don't let mistakes deter you from doing better. You're not one of the people that say, I tried to pay Traci a compliment and told her I don't see race and she didn't like it, so nothing I say or do is right. I'm just going to stop trying. You don't let mistakes deter you from being better. If you make a mistake at work, you don't just throw your hands up and go, I quit. I yield positions of power to those otherwise marginalized. And I surround myself with others who think and look differently than me. Which zone are you in right now? And if you're comfortable sharing, come off mute and tell us. Otherwise, feel free to put it in the chat or just reflect privately.
I'm not proud of it, but I am in the growth zone, and I have been for years. I'm 79, and I started dealing with this stuff when I was a teenager.
Okay.
And I live it 24/7. Brings up a lot of feelings for me, a lot of feelings. I'm a white man, and yet the wound is so great in my soul of how racism wounds my fellow human beings. So I'm determined to be a racism eradicator, not just an anti-racist. I don't even like anti-racist. It's not strong enough.
I love that, Harlan. Thank you. Racism eradicator.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I hope you trademark that.
Thank you.
So you said you're in the growth zone. How did you get there? You've been working on this for years. Maybe you can share?
Well, yeah, that would take an hour. When I was a kid, my dad would say the N-word and stuff like that. And my mother's mother would. She lived with us. And my mom would always say, oh, Eddie, it's not like that. And she was a one, she didn't even know what the whole idea was, and she unconsciously used words that we would call racist now, like picking and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But her heart was great, and it was about her Christian faith. And I absorbed that. And in grade school, there was one African-American. So I lived in a basically segregated racist environment. When I went to middle school and high school, there were Black kids around, but we didn't relate. Our biggest thing was, how do we Swedes relate to those Italians?
Okay.
Black people weren't even on
the radar.
Then I went to college and I became friends with a student from Africa, and I traveled to the South to Koinonia Farm along with an exchange student from Japan. we went through Birmingham. I visited with a family who belonged to the church where the 4 girls were bombed and killed. In 1964, waiting to get in the Peace Corps, I had time because they hadn't yet invited me. So I went to Mississippi and wrote feature stories on the Mississippi Summer Project. The first article I wrote was an interview of Mrs. Schwerner, whose husband at that time was missing. That we didn't even know he'd been killed. Yeah. And I went around and I shopped that around to various newspapers in the Midwest. So I wrote an article every week, and I took pictures. I had darkroom equipment in my trunk, and I stayed in the home of Lutheran families in Mississippi to be safe. And I drove up to N-loving Memphis when I was told the police were following me when I was in Oxford, Mississippi. And then I went across the river over to Arkansas and bought license plates, tags they call them, that were white with red letters, because my Illinois purple with white letters would immediately target me as an enemy.
An enemy. So it sounds to me like you were surrounding yourself with others who think and look different than you, so that you were able to hear and see different perspectives.
Because it enriched my life.
Yeah. So you have that recognition.
It's something I have always loved doing this. And I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, but I don't call myself that. Most of the time, I call myself a consultant human systems, or better yet, a community therapist, because I'm involved in groups like there's a group in Rockford that's called the Winnebago County Action Team. And our goal is to help people who are taken out of their families and put into foster care, languish in foster care, never return to their families of origin. So our group is attempting to change that. I've been in it for over 10 years. We haven't accomplished much. But then the head of DCFS said, how about you also deal with the issue of mortality rates of children from 0 to 3, because 2 to 3 times as many Black children, babies, die as whites. So we're organizing the hospitals, and we're hoping to reach the whole community to deal with that. And also the inequity in terms of maternal death, Black women.
Yeah, Black women, I think it's 3 times the death during childbirth as white women. So thank you for that, Harlan. That's really powerful. That's very powerful. I love that. Racism eradicator. Okay, anybody else want to come off mute and share what zone you're in?
We have lots of comments in the chat where people are sharing that they're in the learning zone and making mistakes, learning and growing. Someone shares that they see themselves in the growth zone and the learning zone, knowing that they can choose what zone they're always learning.
Good. Good. I want to encourage those of you who are saying, you're learning and you're making mistakes, to keep going. It's always the way to go. I minored in college in Spanish and got pretty good at it. I mean, it was my minor and I was pretty good at it. And then, life, and I didn't use it and it kind of fell off. And so I, can speak broken Spanish. Well, I've made this kind of on my bucket list is, I want to reclaim and really, really become fluent in Spanish. I don't have any intent to, move to a Spanish speaking country or anything like that. It's a language that I love, and I want to claim, I want to become fluent in it. All right. It will force me to think different ways and think about speech. So I'm using the app Duolingo. I want to go take a class. I want to actually go to like a community college, and what do they call it when you're not there for a grade? Audit a class, and sit in a conversational Spanish class, but I haven't found time. And I've been saying for like 10 years, I want to do that. So now I'm using the Duolingo app. And I spent 9 days in Puerto Rico on vacation back in towards the end of March. And so it was really great because, I wanted to be able, as I was ordering in restaurants, as I was calling for, talking to the Uber driver, as I'm, just around the island and whatnot and in stores, to use my Spanish. And I was talking to an Uber driver and I was asking a question and he said, and I was talking in Spanish. So, he said, no entiendo, no entiendo. I'm like, okay. So I kept repeating it and he was like, no entiendo. I was making a mistake. And so I asked him, do you speak Hablas inglés and un poquito. Okay, well, you speak a little Spanish, I speak a little English. You speak a little English, I speak a little Spanish. We're going to work this thing out. So I said, how do you say? And I was making a mistake in what I was saying. That did not deter me. Now, it wasn't offensive to him or whatever, but it didn't deter me. So I'm saying that to say, keep going. If you're making mistakes, keep going. All right, I just want to encourage you.
Traci?
Yes.
Hi, this is Patrick Smith. I spoke on one of our other calls.
Yes, hi.
Thank you again. I have a question about that. So I'd say that I'm in the growth space. My next call today is a call with one of my groups at work to continue this type of conversation and focus specifically on actions that we can take to make changes. So I very much appreciate you taking your time to help educate me so that I can bring these conversations forward with others.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I have a question. I think it's specific to the example that you just shared. One of the things that, so I'm the board treasurer for our state bike advocacy group. Mm-hmm. We teach people how to ride bicycles. Sometimes I'm having conversations with other facilitators. Sometimes I'm having conversations with students. When I'm talking with marginalized people of color, for example, and I want to tell them that they're doing a really good job, tell them that, for example, a student is one of the best bicycle skills riders that I've ever seen, or a facilitator is teaching in ways that I admire and I aspire to. Perhaps these are people whom I don't know, I've not met them before. I know that my actions may be considered and taken as microaggressions or racist behavior, potentially, if I'm being interpreted as thinking of them as lesser to begin with. But really what my intention is, and how I certainly want to be received, is appreciating the work that they're doing, either as a student or as a facilitator. How do I continue to practice being aware and mindful and saying the right things while complimenting people for great jobs that they're doing, making no presupposition that they are any way inferior? I'm just admiring so much what they do.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and thank you for that. So listen, let me put it in the context of the example I gave. If you said, Traci, you're so articulate, that's just triggering. You have to understand that we're thought of as less and we don't know how to speak English and all of that stuff. If you said, Traci, that was a phenomenal workshop. You did a phenomenal job of really breaking down anti-racism and giving me things to think about. And I really enjoyed the workshop. Thank you. What a great compliment, right? But if there's anything hidden in there that's like the subtone is for a Black person, you're so articulate, because for a Black person is how we receive that. So talk about the skills, the content, of these instructors. Like, you are doing a phenomenal job of breaking down the elements of bicycle riding. I don't know enough about it, but really connecting with the students, or you're one of the best bicycle riders because you're really demonstrating this and these skills in bicycle riding. It is okay to compliment people, and I want to try to help us not be so paranoid, but part of the growth and evolution is sort of understanding those triggering things. But compliments, always welcome. It's hard to, it's those things that, like, you're articulate. It's those things that have become trigger words or subtext or code for a Black person. Okay.
Thank you. This helps.
Okay. All right. But compliments are always welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. Thanks for that question. So we want to start to use a racial equity lens in our work, and always asking, how is racism operating here? So let's start with the mechanisms of our organizations. We want to look at the structures the who, the what, the when, the where, about decision-making. The policies, those are the written hows. Our practices and norms, those are the unwritten hows. And our values, using a racial equity lens. You cannot dismantle racism if you don't look through a racialized lens, all right? So when you're in the growth zone now, you can begin to interrogate how racism is manifesting in our systems by looking at these mechanisms, all right? And let's walk through an example of what a racial equity lens on a problem might look like, all right? So we've identified that there's an excess, disproportionate number of Black people dying from COVID. So let's examine, how is racism operating here? The hospitals in predominantly Black communities are under-resourced. This is a structure issue. There's racial segregating into poor communities with less access to quality health care and adequate health care. Hospitals in these communities don't have the proper supplies or quantities to deal with COVID. Because there's lack of proper adequate access to good health care in poor Black communities, regular preventative health care is not happening. Because these are poor communities without resources, grocery stores don't move into these communities. They're food deserts. They're depending on the local mom and pop stores who are heavy on processed food and pork, for example, and fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, organic food, even if present, is higher priced. It costs to be healthy. It costs to eat healthy, all right? So some people may think that Black people aren't healthy and it's that we have these higher incidences of these diseases that we talked about. But again, if you look beneath the surface, sometimes it's due to not trusting the healthcare system that Black people don't go to the doctor. Why? I grew up with two sets of great grandparents, and I remember my great grandmother saying, "I don't like to go to the doctor. You know, they practice on us." Okay. That's not an irrational thought for her. Tuskegee experiments, Henrietta Lack, Charles Drew. Policies. How do policies manifest in limited personal protective equipment, limited PPE for low-wage essential workers, heavily populated by Black folks, limited and Latinos, limited paid sick leave, if any, our practices, testing centers that in wealthier white communities, you just drive up testing centers. In poor communities, they're few and far between. They require appointments. We have testing strategies for these Black communities where you only get tested if you're symptomatic. So I already have to have COVID potentially before I can go get tested. So I've been walking around spreading COVID before I can get tested. Our norms, there's a narrow focus on the individual, and we have an ahistorical, not factual view of Black people and our worth and value. The myth of meritocracy. Well, you are only poor and live in those communities because you are lazy and don't work. If you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, then you wouldn't have to live in those communities. Our values in this country, as a country, these systems value white lives over Black lives. This is having a racialized lens. And then when we're looking at this, we have to have in mind, what does a race-conscious health equity, what does race-conscious health equity justice look like? Health equity is the assurance of the conditions for optimal health for all people. Achieving that requires valuing all, there are more things. Here are 3 examples. Valuing everybody equally. Yes, all lives matter, That is a true statement. But it is also a true statement that Black lives matter. Because if all lives matter, then Black lives matter, and that shouldn't be offensive. Black lives matter too, T-O-O, because this country does not demonstrate that. Recognizing and rectifying historical injustices. There is a quote, I believe it's from Malcolm X, that says, if you stick a knife in me 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, that is not helpful. That is not improvement. That is not progress. If you stick a knife in me 9 inches and pull it fully out, you take the knife out of my back, that is not progress. Progress is you pull the knife out and repair the harm, attend to the harm that was caused by the knife wound. So recognizing and rectifying historical injustices and providing resources equitably, not equally, equitably. If that neighborhood already has 99% of the people have access to free testing and no appointments necessary, and you can get it without symptoms, then you don't need to go build more testing systems and create more capacity in that neighborhood. You need to do it over in this neighborhood where access is a real problem and people are dying. And sorry to that neighborhood over there, not sorry, you don't have a problem, right? So we're distributing resources equitably. All right, that's the end of the formal piece. Now I want to talk about, in the remaining few minutes, and I recognize that we're down to just a few minutes, but I want to hear from you. Either come off mute or you can put in the chat. Is this racialized equity lens, is moving towards an anti-racist personal philosophy and organizationally, do you see this as possible? Or for you, do you just feel like the barriers are too high? And if it's possible, what then is the one thing you can do starting tomorrow, starting Monday at work? What's one thing that you can do? Is this possible for you? And what's one thing that you can do? You can put it in the chat. You can come off mute.
I see it as more than possible. I see it as happening. I see we have Kamala Harris as vice president, likely to become president. I see it as the first Black woman in Illinois becoming the chair of the Democratic Party. So I see it happening more and more. It's so slow a process. It's a frustrating process, but it's slowly happening, and it's so good to see, because we have been so cheated for so long by the oppression, repression, and suppression of our sisters and brothers of color, and denied their participation with what they have to bring to the table. I often say, you know, I was in a Black History Museum, and I learned that it was a freed slave that invented the hypodermic needle. Where the hell would we be today without that? What else have we missed?
Dr. Charles Drew invented, I don't know if that's the right word. He performed the first open heart surgery, right? And taught the rest of the medical community how to do open heart surgeries. I mean, his work in performing the first one, all the progress on how to do open heart surgeries starts with Dr. Charles Drew. And yet, when he needed a heart surgery, he died.
Wow.
For not getting it at a white hospital because he was Black.
Look at the Nigerian doctor that diagnosed traumatic brain injury.
Mm-hmm.
And what's that done, you know, for football players, for boxers and so on, for people who have experienced that.
Yeah. I'm seeing, oh, Bob, progress is never sticking the knife in. Well, that's certainly true, but you know, we're human and bump into each other. But yeah, if we can not stick the knife in someone's back, that's progress. That's progress.
I love you, Tracy.
I love you too, Bob. Did I tell you guys, Bob and I discovered we're Facebook friends. Like, I don't know how we became Facebook friends. I have a lot of Facebook friends I don't know personally, and then discovered Facebook. Yeah, we've been Facebook friends for years. So, so much history erased because of systemic racism. I'm working to make it happen on my call in 3 minutes. That was, I believe it was Patrick who was talking to us about how to be racist, anti-racist. We don't need help in how to be racist, how to be anti-racist. All right. I want you guys to really think about what you can do. Tomorrow personally, Monday at work. You can't take it all on, but what's the one thing that you can do? Matthew, new director of DEI and belonging at the Rockford Park District. Awesome, awesome. I'm glad to see that these entities and organizations are hiring DEI people, recognizing that we need someone whose eye is on here. I want you to remember, you don't have to have the title to be doing DEI work, but certainly it's great that they're giving people the titles and the responsibility to do this work. You cannot diversify yourself out of racialized outcomes and racist systems. All right. Thank you all so much. I very much appreciate, Jody, I see it is going to take a ton of work and it's slow. And thank you, Violetta. I appreciate that. So thank you all. I've so much enjoyed being with you over the last couple of months. I hope that you got something from all of this. Good luck in your work. Stay in touch.
Thank you, Traci, so much for the conversation this morning and all of the conversations, as well as a thank you to Adrienne for the work that she's done to bring us together and cover these important topics. My name is Billy Callahan. Many of you know me because I email you the event reminders for this, but I'm the Associate Director at NICNE. So I also wanted to take a moment to share a thank you to United Way of Northwestern Illinois, United Way of Rock River Valley. The funds from the Healing Illinois initiative that were granted to us made this event possible, and as well as the other belonging work that we're doing, which includes the Courageous Conversation Facilitator training. So if you attended that in March and went to the Community of Practice in April, know that there is a May Community of Practice session coming up in 2 Fridays. You'll see a reminder from me for that. If you're registered, if you want to join and you're not registered, please do email me. I'll type my email into a chat in here in a moment. In a last reminder, I will share the event recordings with you, along with a link to the event evaluation and a toolkit from Traci and Adrienne with Candid Conversations Matter. They have an entire toolkit they've created to help you lead the work in your organizations and in your personal life, so I'll share that with you as well. Just a reminder, we have that Community of Practice session on the 21st. I know some of you have been there. We have Ellen Ammer, who's a local facilitation expert, and Tower Flowers, who is also a facilitator, leading that conversation along with Traci. So we look forward to that conversation. And thank you again. We hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Hey, are you on the road?